It has been a year and a half since protests and calls to defund the police erupted across the city of Minneapolis and then the country. Well, tonight, Minneapolis voters cast their ballots in the first election since the city was rocked by the murder of George Floyd by a former Minneapolis police officer named Derek Chauvin. The Associated Press is now reporting that voters have rejected this ballot measure. It would have dissolved the police department as we know it in favor of something called a Department of Public Safety, which, yes, would have probably had police officers as a part of that department. Shaq Brewster is on the ground in Minneapolis. And Shaq, this was also playing in the mayor's race. This also seemed to split the party along some familiar progressive moderate lines in the state of Minnesota and the city of Minneapolis that, frankly, we're getting used to in Congress. What are you hearing, and why did this go down to defeat?
Yeah, Chuck, this was definitely a contentious question that Minneapolis voters had to contend with on their ballot. And you made that headline, but let's say it again. A year and a half after the murder of George Floyd, you had a majority of Minneapolis voters striking down, voting no on an amendment that would have removed or eliminated the Minneapolis Police Department and instead replaced it with this Department of Public Safety. With the latest reporting now, I'm looking at the Secretary of State's office right now, 97% of precincts reporting, 56% of voters voted no, 44% of voters voted yes, and that bar was 51%. That is what voters needed to clear in order to have this amendment be passed. I spoke to the campaign manager just a couple of minutes ago for the group, it was a coalition group against this amendment. They worked hard in opposition to this amendment, running television ads, knocking on doors, making phone calls, and they said that this is not a full celebration at this point. They say, and I'll read a statement that she said she made clear, or voters made clear, that what they want is a planned approach that includes serious consultation with communities most impacted by violent crime and over-policing. And she says the attention now shifts to holding police accountable. And that is the message that you're hearing from those who are opposed to this ballot amendment. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of disappointment for those who supported this ballot amendment. If we just kind of remind viewers of how this got on the ballot initially, this was something that in the weeks after George Floyd's death, you had a majority of city council members stand on stage in a park, and under the stage it said defund and dismantle the police. That then led to the call for voters to have their say to dramatically reform the police department. As you mentioned, if this amendment passed, there still would be police officers, but it would structurally change what this department would look like. And in the words of the supporters, it would have given the city council more power to add co-responders, add mental health professionals to the police department and respond to the calls of those protesters. So you have, we're right outside of the Yes for Minneapolis campaign party. This was the group that collected more than 20,000 signatures to get this question on the ballot. They're speaking right now. A lot of disappointment that you hear and see in that room right now. But I'll tell you, even with the voters that I spoke to throughout the day who said that they were voting no, that said they were uncomfortable with this idea of replacing the entire police department without a specific plan on what would be and what would take place of that, there's still those calls for reform. What that reform will look like, that remains to be seen at this point, Chuck.
And Shaq, there wasn't a whole lot of polling surrounding this question, but can you just give us a quick sense of what you witnessed in the days leading up to this vote that you think led to getting a no vote?
Really good point, because we did come into this election day somewhat blind. The last real public poll that we saw heading into this was in September. It was at the start of early voting here in Minnesota, and at that point you saw about 49%, according to that poll, of voters saying that they supported this amendment, but you still had a lot of undecided voters there, and that was before you really saw this pressure campaign of opposition really step up. I mentioned a little bit with the television ads, but even last week, for example, you had the police chief come out, a popular figure here in Minneapolis, someone who's praised with how he handled the response to the murder of George Floyd and his quick decision to fire the 4 officers. You had him give about a half-hour press conference explaining to voters why he was opposed to this amendment. And one thing that you heard from the opponents, from the police chief to the mayor who's up for re-election, we likely won't have those results, by the way, until tomorrow because of the ranked choice voting. But one consistent theme that you heard from opponents to this measure was that the idea that the new department that would come up was not defined, that it wasn't clear what it would be. It would split control between the city council and the mayor, and that was something the police chief said was just simply unworkable. He said it would be inconceivable to have a department where we had 14 bosses and not that exclusive control over the mayor. So the opposition to this amendment definitely stepped up in recent weeks. I'll tell you, I also attended a forum, a debate between advocates of this amendment and opponents of this amendment that was held in the north side of Minneapolis, a predominantly African-American neighborhood there, and you heard a lot of concern from people there. Again, there's the common theme that they want safety, they want police reform, they want accountability. That's the word you continue to hear, but there was deep distrust with saying that they were going to replace the police department without a specific plan on what was there in place of it.
Shaq Brewster on the ground for us in Minneapolis. Like I said earlier, I feel like they might have let you vote. You've been in Minneapolis for the last off and on for so long. Anyway,
if I vote, then I would have had to pay taxes, so I'm fine just voting one place.
Fair enough.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.